The glass tower gleamed in the morning light, its panels catching the sun as employees hurried toward the revolving doors. Laughter, the clink of shoes against marble, and the buzz of phones filled the air. Amid all this energy, Marcus Hayes moved quietly, mop in hand, his broad shoulders bent slightly as he worked across the pristine lobby floor. His uniform smelled faintly of bleach, and his calloused hands carried the rhythm of a man who had scrubbed, swept, and polished for years without anyone noticing. People walked past him as if he were invisible, their eyes fixed on emails, deals, or gossip, never once pausing to acknowledge the man keeping their floors immaculate. But Marcus wasn't alone. On a bench near the side of the lobby, his daughter, Lila, swung her legs back and forth. She was 7 years old, bright-eyed and endlessly curious, her coloring book balanced on her knees. The faint scratch of her crayon mixed with the low hum of chatter, but unlike the employees rushing past, she looked up at her father often. Each time, she smiled, and each time, he smiled back, that small exchange more valuable to him than any executive's approval. To Lila, her father wasn't just a janitor. He was a protector, a storyteller, and the one constant in a world that had given them little kindness. Since her mother had walked out when she was only 3, Marcus had raised her alone, working 2 jobs to pay for school supplies, clothes, and the rent on their modest apartment. To the world, he was just another man in overalls. To her, he was everything. That morning, as Marcus wrung out the mop and leaned it against the bucket, a group of well-dressed executives clustered near the elevators. Their laughter floated across the lobby. He didn't mean to overhear, but their voices carried. "Look at that," one said, tilting his chin toward Lila. "He actually brings his kid to the office? What is this, daycare?" Another snickered, adjusting his silk tie. "Imagine growing up knowing your dad cleans toilets for a living. Poor girl. She'll never outgrow the smell of disinfectant." The group laughed, sharp and cruel. The words hit Marcus like knives, but he didn't flinch. He was used to it. People had been underestimating him all his life. Instead, he wiped his hands on his uniform and forced himself to breathe. He couldn't afford to lose his temper, not here, not in front of his daughter. Still, the laughter lingered in the marble lobby like a stain he couldn't scrub away. Lila's head tilted slightly as if she had caught the tone, but she said nothing. She went back to coloring, her small fingers pressing harder on the page. Marcus clenched his jaw. Children noticed more than adults gave them credit for. Across the lobby, the heavy glass doors parted with a hiss as a sleek black sedan rolled up to the curb outside. It wasn't unusual to see luxury cars arrive at the building, but this one was different. Its windows were tinted darker than most, and its engine idled in a low purr, drawing subtle attention. Marcus's eyes flicked toward it, then back to his daughter, instinctively uneasy. He bent to pick up Lila's backpack, which had slid off the bench. When he straightened, he noticed the sedan's rear window rolling down just enough for a face to peek out. A man sat inside dressed in a sharp suit, his smile wide but not warm. His hand lifted in a casual wave, beckoning toward Lila. She froze, her crayon slipping from her fingers. The man's voice carried faintly through the open gap. "Hey, sweetheart. Come here. Want a ride?" Marcus's blood turned to fire. In an instant, every fiber of him sharpened with alarm. His chest tightened, his throat dry, but instinct propelled him forward. His voice, usually soft and measured, erupted across the parking lot with a force that silenced everything else. "Lila, don't get in the car." The words thundered, echoing off the glass walls. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. Heads snapped toward the sound. The polished rhythm of morning routine shattered under the weight of his shout. Lila jerked her head toward her father, her eyes wide, confusion mixing with fear. Her small hands clutched the straps of her backpack. The man in the sedan leaned back slightly, his smile faltering. On the far side of the lobby, a chauffeur opened a door, and Eleanor Graves, the CEO, stepped onto the pavement. Tall, poised, and wrapped in a navy suit that exuded command, she had been mid-conversation with an assistant when Marcus's voice cut through the air. She froze, her sharp eyes narrowing as she turned toward the source of the commotion. Employees whispered, shifting uneasily. To them, Marcus had always been background noise, someone who swept floors and blended into corners. But now his voice had torn through their carefully curated world, raw and commanding, something that couldn't be ignored. Marcus's heart pounded so hard it hurt. His chest rose and fell like he'd just run a marathon. All he saw was his daughter, her innocence caught in the crosshairs of something dangerous. The man in the sedan still had the window cracked, his smile curling back into something tighter, stranger, as though daring Marcus to act further. The silence that followed his shout was suffocating. It felt like the entire company held its breath. Even Eleanor's stride slowed, her eyes locked not on the mysterious car, but on the janitor who had just disrupted the order of her morning. And for the first time, Marcus Hayes was no longer invisible. Gasps rippled across the wide, echoing space of the lobby. A few employees craned their necks to see past the glass, toward the curb where the black sedan idled with its engines still rumbling low. Eleanor Graves paused with one polished heel on the pavement, her assistant frozen beside her. The sound of Marcus's yells still vibrated in the air like a strike of thunder. The janitor, the man most of them had never heard speak above a murmur, had roared with the authority of a general. People stared at him, then at the little girl clinging to her backpack straps with white knuckles. The sedan door cracked open, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit. His hair was slicked back, his sunglasses perched casually on his head as though he had all the confidence in the world. He gave a slow grin that was meant to be reassuring but only looked oily. His voice slid through the morning air, low and falsely warm. "Hey, sweetheart. Don't be scared. Your dad asked me to give you a ride." A murmur spread through the gathering employees. Some exchanged looks of disbelief. A few frowned, uncertain whether to intervene. Most simply waited, unwilling to step into the conflict between a janitor and a stranger in an expensive car. Lila looked between the man and her father, her small chest heaving in panic. Marcus stepped forward, his fists tight at his sides. His voice, still trembling with fury, cut like a blade. "Stay away from my daughter." The stranger tilted his head and gave a mocking little chuckle. "Relax, janitor. I was just being polite. No need to cause a scene." He glanced toward the cluster of executives and then, almost staringly, toward Eleanor, who now stood completely still, assessing every detail. Marcus's eyes narrowed, his whole body taut with the restrained violence of a father on the edge. "Polite?" he spat. "You roll down a tinted window and call a child over like she's yours? That's not polite. That's predatory." The air thickened. Conversations had died entirely now. Phones hovered halfway to ears, and even security guards at the far end of the lobby hesitated, waiting for a cue. Some executives exchanged hushed words. "What is he doing? Why is he screaming? He's going to lose his job for this." But others, softer voices, whispered, "He's right. That didn't look right at all." The man in the suit smirked wider, though a trace of unease had crept into his eyes. He raised his hands slightly in mock surrender. "Hey now, don't get so worked up. I didn't mean any harm. Just thought I'd offer a little kindness." Marcus took another step closer, placing himself squarely between the car and his daughter. His chest rose and fell in heavy breaths. "Kindness doesn't involve tricking a child. Kindness doesn't hide behind tinted glass. You so much as look at her again and I'll—" He stopped himself, biting off the words, but his glare said the rest. The stranger's smirk flickered. For the first time, his arrogance looked brittle. He turned toward Eleanor, as if seeking an ally in power. "Ms. Graves, isn't this a little much? I'm sure you can explain to your employee that he's overreacting." All eyes shifted to the CEO. Eleanor stood like a statue, her face unreadable. Her assistant shifted nervously beside her, tugging at the corner of a tablet, waiting for the icy reprimand they all expected her to deliver. Eleanor had built a reputation on control, on sharp, decisive words that cut down incompetence and disorder. Surely, They thought she would silence the janitor and restore order to her company's doorstep. But she didn't speak immediately. Her gaze flicked from Marcus, still blazing with protective fury, to the stranger, whose smoothness cracked under the weight of her scrutiny. The pause stretched long enough that whispers began to swell again. Finally, her voice came, crisp as glass breaking. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her tone cool but not dismissive. "I trust you have an explanation for shouting across my lobby." Marcus straightened, the weight of every watching eye pressing on him. His jaw tightened, and for a brief moment he almost felt the urge to apologize. Almost. But then he glanced at Lila, her eyes wide, her small frame trembling with fear. The thought of her being coaxed into that car, stolen from him forever, burned away any hesitation. He raised his chin. "Explanation?" His voice carried steady now, less a roar but no less powerful. "That man just tried to lure my daughter into his car. That's all the explanation you need." A stunned silence fell. You could have heard the hum of the fluorescent lights above, the faint whir of the revolving door. Eleanor's assistant blinked rapidly, as though unsure whether he had misheard. Some executives shifted uncomfortably, shame flickering across their features. Others scoffed quietly, convinced Marcus was exaggerating. The stranger gave a short laugh, though sweat gleamed faintly at his hairline. "This is absurd. I was being polite. Everyone's twisting this into something ugly." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying the first hint of real fear. But Marcus didn't waver. He pointed toward the cameras fixed in the lobby corners. "Check the footage. Look at the way he waved her over. Look at his face. And then tell me I'm imagining it." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered toward security. Two guards began walking closer, uncertain but ready. The tension in the air was a wire drawn tight, ready to snap. Employees shifted uneasily, some glancing toward the street as if hoping to escape the discomfort, others glued to the scene with morbid fascination. Whispers rose again. "Is she really going to side with him? If she fires the janitor in front of everyone, what will that look like? But what if he's wrong?" The company, in that moment, was balanced on the thin line between truth and dismissal. Marcus's voice cut through once more, raw but unwavering. "I've spent years being ignored in this building. I've swallowed your whispers, your laughter, your looks at my daughter like she doesn't belong. But I will not swallow this. I will not stand by while a stranger preys on her, not even if it costs me everything." Lila's small hand tugged at his pant leg, her voice trembling. "Daddy, don't let him take me." The sound broke through the last of the murmur. Dozens of hearts clenched at once. The stranger's face darkened, his confident mask unraveling inch by inch under the weight of a child's fear and a father's resolve. Eleanor's eyes narrowed to slits, the gears of her mind turning behind their cold steel hue. She hadn't moved yet, hadn't spoken judgment, but the stage was set. One wrong word could end Marcus's career, and one decisive command could change everything. The silence stretched, every breath in the lobby suspended, as the company waited to see which way its leader would turn. And in that silence, Marcus stood taller than he ever had, daring the world to tell him he was wrong. The man in the suit adjusted his cuffs as though the weight of every stare didn't matter, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed him. He gave a scoff, shaking his head as if the accusation were too ridiculous to be real. "This is nonsense. I've been misunderstood. I only wanted to help. People are turning this into something ugly." His voice faltered slightly, pitched too high to sound convincing. Marcus didn't back down. He stood planted between his daughter and the man, every muscle taut. His chest heaved with the lingering burn of adrenaline, but his eyes never left the stranger. "You call it helping," he said evenly, "but I know the difference between kindness and a trap. You don't smile at a child through tinted glass unless you're hiding something. And I won't let you near her." The crowd stirred with unease. Executives who minutes before had mocked Marcus now avoided his gaze, their laughter dried to dust in their throats. Some whispered that he was exaggerating. Others said maybe he was right. But none dared step forward. They were observers, unwilling to risk their polished shoes on a dirty floor. Eleanor Graves finally moved. Her heels clicked on the pavement as she stepped closer, the air bending with the gravity she carried. Every eye turned toward her, waiting for judgment. She had built an empire on decisiveness, and her word could elevate or destroy a man in an instant. Her gaze shifted to the suited stranger. "What's your name?" she asked, her tone cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The man hesitated. "Harper," he said finally, his smirk returning, though thinner now. "Richard Harper. Consultant. I've been working with some of your people." Something stirred in Eleanor's expression. She didn't let it show, but Marcus saw the faint tightening at her jaw. She remembered. Weeks ago, her office had received a vetting report about a Harper, someone who had attempted to position himself as a business partner but whose record was riddled with inconsistencies. Fraud. Manipulation. Allegations that made him a liability. His name had been quietly blacklisted. And now here he stood, caught at the company's doorstep, trying to lure a child into his car. Marcus's voice thundered again, though steadier than before. "Check the cameras. Check his record. You'll find I'm telling the truth. But don't ask me to sit here and pretend this didn't happen." The crowd shifted nervously. One executive muttered, "He's bluffing." Another whispered, "But if he's not?" Tension rippled outward like waves against glass, cracking the morning calm. Eleanor's eyes didn't waver. She turned to her head of security, who had finally approached. "Escort Mr. Harper off the property," she ordered. "Now." The stranger's bravado cracked at last. "What? You can't just throw me out. This man is making a scene. He's trying to cover for..." "No," Eleanor repeated, sharper this time. The guards closed in. Harper's shoulders stiffened, but he knew when he was outnumbered. He allowed himself to be led toward the sedan, his protest spilling out in weaker tones. "This is all a misunderstanding. You'll regret this." His voice grew smaller as he was pushed into the car and the door slammed shut. The vehicle pulled away, its engine growling as though in defeat. Silence blanketed the courtyard. All that remained was Marcus, his daughter clutching his side, and the weight of dozens of eyes on them. He swallowed, his anger cooling into exhaustion. His chest still rose and fell in sharp bursts, but he held his ground, even as fear whispered in the back of his mind. What if this cost him his job? What if speaking out in defense of his daughter made him disposable to the company? But then Eleanor turned her gaze to him, and for the first time in all the years he had worked there, she didn't look through him. She looked at him. The ice in her expression softened slightly, though her tone remained firm. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "you may have just prevented something unthinkable." The crowd rippled with murmurs. Some employees exchanged guilty glances, remembering every time they had dismissed him as nothing more than background noise. Others simply stared in disbelief. The janitor had confronted a predator in front of them all, and the CEO herself had acknowledged it. Marcus bent slightly to scoop Lila into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder, her small hands gripping the fabric of his uniform tightly. He kissed the top of her head, whispering, "It's okay, baby. I've got you." But the questions lingered. Why Harper? Why here? Was it just chance, or had someone within the company made a mistake, letting him close enough to learn about Marcus and his daughter? Marcus's instincts told him this was no accident. Eleanor must have thought the same. Her eyes flicked toward the clusters of employees who were already pretending to be busy on their phones. She frowned, then stepped closer to Marcus, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "We need to talk. Now." Marcus stiffened, clutching his daughter tighter. "About what?" "About why a man flagged for fraud and manipulation was standing outside my building calling your child over," she said quietly. "This wasn't random. And I need to know how he knew her name." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't realized until now that Harper had spoken with such familiarity, as if he already knew who Lila was. A cold weight settled in his stomach. He glanced down at his daughter, who was still trembling softly against him. "All right," he said finally, his voice firm but guarded. Let's talk. Eleanor gave a curt nod, then turned sharply toward her assistant. Clear my schedule. The assistant blinked, startled, but obeyed instantly. Security stood by, waiting for further instruction. The employees lingered, pretending to resume their routines but clearly shaken by what they had just witnessed. The polished rhythm of the corporate morning had been broken, and the image of a janitor yelling to save his daughter refused to leave their minds. As Marcus followed Eleanor toward the elevators, holding his daughter close, whispers trailed after him. They were no longer whispers of mockery. They were whispers of awe, confusion, and the slow crumbling of a prejudice they had carried for years. For Marcus, the only thing that mattered was that Lila was safe in his arms. But deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. Something darker lurked behind Harper's presence, something tied to the very company that had ignored him all these years. And now, whether he wanted it or not, he and the CEO were entangled in the same dangerous truth. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, reflecting Marcus's face in polished steel. He stepped inside, Eleanor at his side, the doors closing on the stunned faces still watching. The hum of the ascent filled the silence, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavier than the air itself. The elevator doors slid open on the top floor, and Marcus stepped out with Lila clinging to his side. The air here was different, quieter, cooler, polished with the faint scent of expensive wood polish and leather. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed the city sprawled out below like a glittering map. He had been up here only once before, years ago, when he was mistakenly sent to deliver supplies to the executive suite. Back then, he had been told sharply to leave, as though his presence contaminated the air. Now he walked in, invited, his daughter's small heartbeat pressed against his chest. Eleanor Graves motioned toward her office, a cavern of glass and steel with a mahogany desk that gleamed under the light. She dismissed her assistant with a flick of her hand and gestured for Marcus to sit. He hesitated, lowering Lila into one of the leather chairs first before taking the seat beside her. His large hands dwarfed the armrests, his uniform stark against the pristine setting. For a long moment, the CEO said nothing. She stood at the window, gazing down at the traffic crawling along the boulevard, her reflection cutting a sharp line against the skyline. Marcus could hear the faint tick of a clock somewhere behind her, each second stretching the silence further. Finally, she turned. "You know why I brought you here," she said. Her voice was even, but her eyes betrayed the weight of thought behind them. "That man wasn't random. His name has crossed my desk before. He's been circling this company like a vulture for months, trying to find a way in. When I denied him, he looked for another weakness." She paused, her gaze falling briefly to Lila. "Apparently he thought he found it." Marcus's fists clenched, the old anger stirring again. "Families are always the first target. People like him look for the ones no one pays attention to. Men like me. Children like her." His voice cracked on the last word, though he swallowed it quickly. Eleanor studied him. For the first time since he had known of her, she wasn't looking through him like he was a smudge on the floor. She was looking at him like a man who had stood his ground when no one else dared. "You've shown more vigilance today than half my security team," she admitted. The words were almost foreign on her tongue, but she didn't retract them. "If you hadn't shouted when you did." She didn't finish the sentence. The implication was enough. Lila's small voice broke the silence. "He scared me, Daddy." She was holding the corner of Marcus's sleeve tightly, her eyes still shimmering with fear. Marcus bent toward her, his voice softening. "I know, baby. But you're safe now. He's gone." Eleanor's expression shifted at that, just slightly. Something almost like guilt flickered across her features. She walked closer, her heels muffled against the carpet, and crouched down so her gaze met Lila's directly. "You were very brave," she told her. "Your father protected you, and I promise, no one will ever come near you here again." Lila blinked, uncertain at first, then nodded slowly. Marcus exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening by a fraction. He hadn't expected kindness from the CEO. Respect was something he'd stopped waiting for long ago. But in her voice, in the way she looked at his daughter, there was sincerity he hadn't thought possible. Hours later, word of the incident had swept through every floor of the building. The whispers that once mocked Marcus now carried awe. Some employees avoided his gaze out of shame. Others offered hesitant nods of respect. The story spread beyond the company walls. The janitor who had stopped a predator right at the doorstep of one of the city's most powerful corporations. By the end of the week, Eleanor made it official. In a company-wide meeting, she stood at the podium, her tone sharp as ever but tinged with something new. "It has come to my attention," she announced, "that safety is only as strong as those who uphold it. And sometimes, the ones we overlook are the very ones who see most clearly." She gestured to Marcus, standing stiffly at the edge of the stage, uncomfortable under so many eyes. "From this day forward, Marcus Hayes will lead our building safety and security operations." The room erupted in murmurs. Some were shocked. Others applauded, the sound swelling until it filled the auditorium. Marcus's throat tightened as he glanced down at Lila, who sat in the front row, her small hands clapping proudly for her father. He hadn't asked for this role. He hadn't dreamed of titles or promotions. He had wanted nothing more than to work quietly, to provide for his daughter, to get through the days. But now, standing there with hundreds of eyes on him, he realized something had shifted. He was no longer invisible. He had become the man his daughter already knew him to be. On his first day as head of building safety, Marcus walked through the lobby with Lila at his side. The marble floors gleamed as always, but the air felt different. People who once sneered at him stepped aside now, offering respectful nods. Some even thanked him. No one laughed. No one whispered. His badge, clipped to his uniform, wasn't a symbol of status to him. It was a reminder of the day he had refused to stay silent. He guided his daughter to the same bench where she had once colored while waiting for him to finish mopping floors. She looked around, noticing the way people glanced at them differently now. "Daddy," she whispered, "they're not laughing anymore." Marcus smiled faintly, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They finally see what I already knew," he said softly. "That you're worth protecting. That we're worth something more." As they walked toward the elevator, Eleanor passed by. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and she gave him a nod, the kind of nod reserved not for staff, but for equals. He returned it, no words needed. Later that evening, Marcus carried Lila home. She fell asleep against his shoulder, her breathing steady, her small weight a constant reminder of why he had shouted that morning. He laid her gently in bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin, brushing her curls away from her face. Watching her sleep, he realized that what had begun as fear had become something larger. It had reshaped not only his life but the way an entire company viewed him. He turned out the light, the room bathed in soft moon glow. In the quiet, he whispered, "You'll never have to doubt that I'll be here, Lila. Never." And as he stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the glow of the hall, he understood that true power had nothing to do with polished suits, marble floors, or titles etched on doors. True power was the courage to stand up in the moment it mattered most, no matter who was watching. In a world that had dismissed him as invisible, Marcus Hayes had forced everyone to see. And in seeing him, they were forced to reckon with the truth. Dignity and strength don't come from position, but from the fierce love that will never let go. That was his legacy. Not just a title. Not just a new role. But the day his voice saved his daughter and, in some way, reminded an empire what it meant to be human.